Glad to see everyone this morning. I have a few announcements to make as everybody's getting settled in. Tonight at 6 p.m. is the Lord's table, so be ready for that. May the 9th is the Elders Deacons meeting. Mother's Day, of course, is the 14th. There's no evening service that day. Saturday's the men's breakfast. And men's Bible study resumes on Mondays, so be prepared for that. We had it Tuesday this last week, but it's going back to Mondays. June the 3rd is our community outreach. We need several adult leaders to commit to staying in one position and helping. Lots of teens and children have signed up, want to do that, but they need some adult supervision really bad. So we need to make sure that we sign up for those positions so that things will go correctly. If you have any questions about that, talk to the Fishers or to Pastor Jeff. And the sign up is on the bulletin board. Mark?
Looks nice. All right, if you'll stand with me and lift your voices. How excellent is thy name, O Lord. How excellent is thy name. Heaven and earth together proclaim. How excellent is thy name. How excellent is thy name, O Lord. How excellent is thy name. Heaven and earth together proclaim. How excellent is thy name. It is the cry of my heart to follow you. It is the cry of my heart to be close to you. It is the cry of my heart to follow all the days of my life. Teach me your holy ways, O Lord, so I can walk in your truth. Teach me your holy ways, O Lord, and make me wholly devoted to you. It is a cry of my heart to follow you. It is a cry of my heart to be close to you. It is the cry of my heart to follow all the days of my life. Open my eyes so I can see the wonderful things that you do. Open my heart up more and more and make it wholly devoted to you. It is a cry of my heart to follow you. It is a cry of my heart to be close to you. It is a cry of my heart to follow all the days of my life. Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became poor. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. When I look into your holiness, when I gaze into your loveliness, when all things that surround become shadows in the light of you, when I found the joy of reaching your heart, when my will becomes enthroned in your love, when all things that surround become shadows in the light of you, I worship you. I worship you. The reason I live is to worship you. I worship you. I worship you. The reason I live is to worship you. seeking a wandering sinner to find. Oh, to be like thee, oh, to be like thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as thou art. Come in thy sweetness, come in thy fullness, stamp thine own image deep on my heart. All right, go ahead and pull out your Bibles. Turn with us to John 2.
After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land I am giving you. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do accordance to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success. Wherever you go, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp, and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan, to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess.
You can be seated. I will serve thee because I love thee. You have given life to me. I was nothing before you found me. You have given life to me. Heartaches, broken pieces, ruined lives are why you died on Calvary. Your touch was what I longed for. You have given life to me. Let's sing that one again. I will serve I love thee. You have given unto me. I was nothing before you found me. You have given unto me. Heartaches, broken pieces, ruined lives are why you died on Calvary. Your touch was what I longed for. You have given unto me. The church's one foundation is Jesus Christ, her Lord. She is his new creation by water and the word. From heaven he came and sought her to be his holy bride. With his own blood he bought her, and for her life he died. Elect from every nation, yet one o'er all the earth. Her charter of salvation, one Lord, one faith, one birth. One holy name she blesses, partakes one holy food, and to one hope she presses with every grace endued. Yet she on earth hath union with God the three in one, and mystics make communion with those whose rest is won. Oh, happy ones and holy, Lord, give us grace that we, like them, the meek and lowly, on high may dwell with thee. Thank you, Jeff, if you would.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm sure that speaker's in the same place, but I think it's moved. I normally have more room to jump up. I don't know. Okay. Let's go ahead and dismiss the kids and let the kids 3 to 8 head back to junior church and do their thing. Down there. All right. Appreciate y'all being here this morning. We've got some visitors, some friends, and then we've got some last of our snowbirds have come back. My understanding is they may have come back just in time to catch a few little bit of snow this week, so good luck with that. I'm hoping they brought some of the Florida warmth back with them, but we'll find out. Tell you what, let's go ahead and pray this morning and get focused on this. Heavenly Father, God, I love you so much. And I love your word. I love the power of it. And Lord, I pray for flexibility this morning to follow you and do things your way. Lord, I pray for grace and focus that I'll be able to present your word clearly, not be distracted by anything. God, I need your help this morning to do it right. We love you, Lord, and we ask this in your name. Amen. So, if you've been with us, okay, they work better when they're turned on. That's amazing how that works. Okay. There's just all these things you got to figure out some days. Okay, so if you've been with us the last couple of weeks, you know that we're working through the book of Joshua. Mike gave us a nice recap, starting in chapter 1 and reading the first part of chapter 1 there, giving us the idea again. Here we are, God's people commanded to go. They're about to go and conquer the promised land. And as we started, and we talked about this earlier, when we first started this, we talked about the idea that just as Israel was called to be an invading army, God said, this is the plan, you go, you take that land. God has given us, as New Testament Christians, He has given us a commission. He has given us a job to do. We are, believe it or not, we are called to be an invading army. We're not here to defend the homeland. We're not here to hide. We are here, placed on this earth, to go out and conquer. And the interesting thing is we started looking at that, we started with preparation, but now we look at understanding the enemy. I had a teacher in college who used to tell the story. It was when we were doing A&P mechanics, working on airplanes. Every year when he started talking about diagnostics, he always started with this story, okay? When he was newly married, he had this little sports car, and it wasn't running right. He was having trouble with it. He was frustrated. So he decides he needs to rebuild the entire engine. Yanks it out, and newly married guy, all right, doesn't have a good garage to work in, yanks it out, rebuilds the engine in the living room. Okay? All right? Amazingly, when I knew him, he'd been married for a long time after that, okay? But yanks the engine, rebuilds it, puts the money into it. They were newly married, young couple, squeezed around, got the money, got all the parts, got it back in the car, still didn't run right. Eventually finds out it's got a cracked distributor cap. Now, if that illustration misses you, instead of the 10-minute $10 fix, he spent days and days rebuilding the engine for a whole lot of money. Okay? When what really happened was he had a $10 part that was cracked, and he needed to fix it. His idea, his point in that story was, in diagnostics, you start with the cheap, easy, and work your way to the expensive, big problems, okay? You rule out the easy stuff. This morning, what I want you to understand, we got to know what we're fighting. We got to know who the enemy is. In our life, in our culture, there's all kinds of things that we are told we should be fighting against. Oh, you've got to fight against this social injustice. You got to fight against that problem. You got to fight against this. You got to fight against that. And as Christians, as Christians, we need to understand what we're fighting against. And as Joshua gets ready to head into the promised land, he wants to know what they're facing. Remember, 40 years before this, the children of Israel were positioned to go in and start conquering the promised land. The spies go in, then they come back and they say, folks, we can't do this. They're big, they're scary, they're fortified cities, and they said, we can't do it. Joshua didn't send them in this time saying, can we do it? He said, go in and figure out who we're going to defeat. There is a difference between can we defeat them and who are we going to defeat? And Joshua went at it, and his two spies went at it with that perspective. Go check out this area. Now he sends the spies in to know the enemy. And for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at this second chapter. Okay, we're going to work through Joshua chapter 2. Now, the interesting part here is I studied it and I started preparing. I started realizing I was getting confused. And I started to realize there's two messages here that are both seen and different parts are seen in different parts of the chapter. So what we're going to do this week, we're going to look at message number 1 in a couple of different parts. Then next week, see, I rope you in. You come one week, you got to come a second week, okay? So you come back next week and you hear the second message that's also intermixed with this chapter. So normally, you know me, I would start at verse 1 and work my way straight through it. We're going to do a little different this week. We're going to use verse 1, we're going to use 9 through 11, then we're going to use the last couple verses. Then next week we'll come back and we'll catch the pieces in the middle, okay? So stick with me and we'll get this done. We're going to use a little tea to keep me from coughing too much. Oh, that's good. All right. Joshua chapter 2. Now, the first part in understanding the enemy, all right? We've already done that part, so we'll move that up there. Know your enemy. This is the first thing we've got to do. We've got to know the enemy. Well, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we do is understand the enemy. Okay, you're like, well, isn't that the same thing as knowing the enemy? Not exactly. There's a fine line difference that we got to figure out here, okay? So we start there in chapter 2, verse 1. And Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go, view the land, especially Jericho. And they went, came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. Now, again, there is stuff that happens that we'll cover next week, okay? But we're going to start with verse 1. What is going on in understanding the enemy? What is the first step that Joshua gives them? What's the first thing he tells them to do? Got to turn it around. Go. You have to go to the enemy. You know, these spies, Joshua says, I need you to get up, go over there, and find out what we're getting into, okay? We're going to attack. We're going to do what God tells us to do, but I want to know what we're headed into. You know what they didn't do? They didn't walk to the edge of their camp and go, what's over there? I think there's a big city a couple miles over there. No, that wouldn't have told them much of anything. You know what they did? They left their camp. They left their security, their comfort, and they went to the other city. They went. You've got to go. But what did they do when they went? I don't think there's a slide on that. Nope, there's not. Okay, I thought so. All right. So first of all, they get up and go. All right. And who do we find? Where do we find them? There in verse 1. It says, and they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. And most pastors that I grew up with kind of tried to find a way around that, okay? A lot of commentators spent a lot of time trying to redefine that original Hebrew word. And a lot of them came around to saying, okay, but if you do this and if you do that, it could have meant she was an innkeeper. And the problem is, the original Hebrew word, you can flex it that way. But when you take the other times that Rahab is mentioned in the New Testament, the Greek word that they used to describe her, there's no flexibility. She was exactly what this passage just said she was. And what in the world? Here are these 2 Hebrew spies, and that's where they go. Folks, we have to go out and learn the enemy, even if their sin is less culturally acceptable than my sin. When we see this, we have got to go and know them. Now, I will tell you, and I will make this clear. You'll notice none of these guys went alone to this place. Okay? There was 2 of them keeping each other accountable, I hope. Okay? there is some things, and there is some concern there. Why did they go here? There's some cultural understanding. This is a place where foreigners could have gone into the city and been at her house and not really stood out that much, okay? Different people were there. They couldn't just go to where all of the normal people were. Sorry to say it that way. But they needed a place they could blend in. So there's that. But there's also that idea of they needed to know what the normal people in that city were thinking. They needed to know who those people were. And Christians, we need to understand that if we're going to understand the people out there, guess what? We've got to go, and we're going to have to spend time with people who might make us uncomfortable. And generally, what we define as uncomfortable is that their sin, I don't like their sin. Because you see, folks, we all have our own sin. But we have convinced ourselves, well, I'm comfortable with my sin. Their sin, that's not my sin, so it looks weird to me. It looks concerning to me. And you know what God says? Sin is wrong, and it's evil, and I hate sin. And it doesn't matter whether it's my sin that fits into my culture or whether it is their sin that doesn't fit my culture. God hates the sin no matter what. But he sends us to know because we have a job to do, right? What is that job? We are an invasion force. And we're not just, now again, the difference between the New Testament version of this and the Joshua version, Joshua's job was to go in and destroy, okay? Our job is to go in, okay, this is where the two messages want to start bleeding together. We'll make some more clarity on this next time, but our job is to go in and steal people from the other army, okay? Now, we'll get to some more of that next week. So if you're wondering, what is he talking about? Wait. Come back next week. All right? I like the cliffhanger. Come back. All right? So, identify the enemy. Know them. Understand them. You've got to go out and spend time with them, and even the undesirable ones. The ones that make you feel uncomfortable. Okay? Just having a discussion this morning about people at work and people who come into work. And there are some people that maybe came into your office, and as they left, you pulled out the air freshener kind of thing. Because, they were gone now, so it was okay to use the air freshener, okay? Folks, there are people out there that are going to be uncomfortable. That are not necessarily going to be fun. But they need the truth of the gospel, no matter what. They need God's truth. So the first thing is they went to the enemy. And that's what we've got to be willing to do. We've got to be willing to go out there, not just expect them to come in here. We've got to go out there. Now, once they went out, they went and then they learned about the enemy. Okay, now there's some stuff that goes on between verse 1 and verse 8. We're going to cover that next week. But we jump down to verse 9. Actually, I'm going to read verse 8. And we find out what this lady, what Rahab tells these guys. Okay? Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. We've got to know the enemy. We've got to learn what the enemy is thinking about, what's going through their head, and we find out some fascinating things about this enemy, okay? You know what they knew? They knew the God of Israel was real. They did. You look at verse 10, it says, "For we have heard." Now, again, let's think about, okay, we're way back in history. Lots of gods, and they gave their gods names. Everybody's god had a name. There was Molech and Baal and several others, okay? There were lots of different gods with names. Israel's God had a personal name too, and that was Yahweh. Okay? That was their name. You couldn't just say God because there were lots of gods that people worshiped and things that they talked about. And here we have this lady. She doesn't say, "You have a God." She said, "Your God, Yahweh." That's how the verse 10 there, when it's capitalized like that, where it says, "Lord, how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea." These people in this city of Jericho, knew what Israel's God had done 40 years ago. 40-ish, 40 plus, 40 years ago, Israel comes up to the Red Sea, Pharaoh's army's chasing them, and God opens up the Red Sea, and they walk across on dry ground. And everybody saw it. And everybody heard about it. And they understood the power of Israel's God. And folks, we live in a world that knows there is a creator God. People fight against it. People argue against it. People spend their entire careers trying to prove that God doesn't exist. Why do you do that? Because deep down inside, man is created with an understanding that there is a higher power. But if we admit that, if we accept that, then we realize that we're responsible to that higher power. If someone had the power to create my entire world by his spoken voice, and then to create me and fashion me with my brain and with my capabilities, I am responsible to do what he wants me to do. And as humans, we don't like that, do we? We don't want to be. We want to do what we want to do. We want to do it our way. And so for all of history, people have been fighting against there being a God. Now, they've come up with other gods, and they designed other gods that they could control, and they made statues, and they worshiped them, and they came up with all kinds of things that they could control, rather than admitting there was a God who was supposed to control them. People didn't like that. And this nation, they saw the power of Israel's God. They saw the Red Sea. 40 years later, they also know, remember, Israel, before they cross the Jordan, which they're about to do, before they do that, they're wandering around in this eastern section. Yes, this eastern section, which goes from the River Jordan to over towards what we would call Iraq, okay? The Moabite desert is what it was referred to here. They're wandering around in this area, and a couple of kings of the Amorites decide to attack them, Sihon and Og. They're outnumbered. Israel's not a military force at this point. They're just people. They have, some military capacity, but not extensive practice. And God defends them. And the people of the land see that this no-name tribal group wipes out these two kings and their armies and takes their land. And they say, that is a powerful God. And folks, we live in a world that knows there is a powerful God out there. But the question is, how do they react to that? How did these people react to it? What did they do? They knew that Israel's God was a real powerful God, but they chose to fight against that God. Now we have to jump to chapter 6. Chapter 6, when Israel actually crosses and they come up to the city of Jericho as an army, they find now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. Jericho sees Israel coming, and what do? Do they surrender? Do they ask the God of Israel for mercy? Do they say, you know what, we'll follow your God? No. They draw in. They put up their walls. Well, they already had their walls up. They close their doors. They lock everything up, and they say, we're going to take a stand, and we are not going to submit to that God. And folks, we live in a world of people who understand there is a God. They will argue it, but they know he's there. But they refuse to submit to him. Folks, we have all the information. They don't honestly have all the information. We need to be out there. We need to tell them. We need to share it with them. We need to tell them about Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection. We need to tell them about salvation. And there are going to be some that resist. They're going to put up the walls. They're going to shut us out. And they're going to say, I won't have it. And that's what we see. That's what Jericho, the city of Jericho, is doing. Okay? They know that Israel's God is real. Rahab says, we all see it. We all know it. In fact, we're scared of you. But what we find later on is that they still try and fight the God of Israel. And it's not a winning battle. We know that. Now, we'll get into that. We'll talk about that later when we get to Joshua chapter 6. But they knew Israel's God was real. They still intended to fight them. Folks, we understand, okay? And when we talk about an enemy, remember I keep saying we are an invasion force, and that does not mean we're trying to take over Indiana, okay? We are not trying to invade Indiana, okay? That's not our plan. Who are we fighting? What is our enemy? You look at Ephesians chapter 6. Satan is our enemy. The people are not the enemy. Oh, Satan is using them. Satan is distracting them. Satan is controlling them. He is affecting the way their world works and what they do. And many of them are living for him, doing whatever he wants them to do. Our job, our invasion, is to go in, find them, pull them out of his army, and bring them into God's army. Bring them into our salvation. Show them the grace and the mercy that God offers them. Folks, our job is to be an invasion force, to go in and pull people out of Satan's army and bring them into ours. We've got to know the enemy we're fighting. We can't be fighting the wrong battle. Our enemy is Satan. He's just using the people around us. So what we find here, okay, they talk to Rahab. She says, we're all freaked out. We're all scared. Now, there's some differences with Rahab, and we'll talk about those next week, okay? But in general, the city is scared. They're in an uproar. They're worried about this. So what do? We know the enemy. We understand them. We've got to go to them. We've got to learn from them, learn about them. But to truly understand the enemy is to be encouraged. He's like, how can you be encouraged when you look at the world around us? I mean, seriously, you think about the world, everything going on around around us, and I'm telling you we should be encouraged. How can we be encouraged? Well, let's look at the report of the spies. We jump to the end of the chapter, all the way down to verse 22. Okay, all the way down to verse 22, says they departed. Okay, these are the spies. They've spied out the land. They're headed back. Okay, and we'll fill in the gaps of the story next week. Okay, they departed and went into the hills and remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned. They had been being chased. We'll get to that next week. And the pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing. Then the two men returned. These are the two spies that Joshua sent out. They come back. They came down from the hills, passed over, and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, truly, the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. What do they come back and tell Joshua? They come back and they say, Joshua, our God is all powerful. He's got this done already. He knows. The people are scared of him. The people are worried about him. We serve the all-powerful God. They were encouraged by the power of their God. And folks, when we look at the world around us, when we see evil, we see sin, we see governments doing really bizarre things, you look out there, and if you focus out there and you let that control your thinking, you'll be anxious, you'll be worried, you'll be stressed, you'll be fearful. Remember, we talked about this last week. I don't know. Remember Peter? No, I remember where I talked about it. Anyhow, remember Peter? They're out in the boat. Waves are crashing. Jesus comes walking out on the water. Peter says, hey, that's Jesus. Jumps out of the boat, starts walking. This is paraphrase. Warning, I'm not quoting direct, okay? Peter jumps out of the boat. He gets out there, and what does he do? He stops focusing on Jesus, and he starts focusing on the waves. That's 10 foot of salt water coming at me. Actually, it wouldn't be. I see Galilee is not salty. Whoops, sorry. 10 foot of fresh water. 10 foot of fresh water. Sorry. Got a wrong body of water. Anyhow, he sees the waves. He sees the problems. He sees the fears and concerns. And when he puts his focus on that, he starts to sink. You know what the absolute coolest part of this whole story is? I mean, Peter walking on the water is pretty cool, right? But you know what the coolest part? It says Peter says, Lord, help me, I'm sinking. And immediately, Jesus reaches down, picks him up. The instant he turned his focus back to Jesus, Jesus is there, pick him up, and take care of him. Folks, it was a couple of weeks ago. We went through a whole series on fear and anxiety and dealing with it. And folks, it all comes back to focusing on Jesus. You truly serve the all-powerful God. You have access to the God who spoke your world into existence. He said, I want there to be light. And it was there. The science behind light fascinates me. What it is, what it isn't. It can transmit electricity. It can carry energy. It's a wave form. It's multicolored, except we don't see it most of the time. There is such a vast number of things that light does. We can't live without sunlight. We can't function. The sun's light comes and provides electricity if we harness it correctly. And you know what? God just said, let there be light. And it was there. In all of its power, in all of its scientific amazement, it was just there because God said it needed to be there. You have the all-powerful God available to you. We don't have to be scared. We don't have to be worried. We have to trust Him. The spies came back. They had just seen a city with, from archaeological understanding, with an air gap in between, 2 massive walls big enough to drive chariots on top of. And they come back and they're like, piece of cake, man, we got this. Because God is going to do it. They were encouraged by the power of their God. And they were also encouraged by the weakness of their enemy. There at the end of verse 24, he says, also, all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. He says they're all just given up. Folks, we tend to see the world around us, and we see Satan's hand working. And we know he's called the prince and the power of the air. We know that he is powerful. And we get nervous about that, and we get worried about, well, but what is Satan doing, and is he attacking, and what's he doing? And you know what God says? I kicked him out once. I can handle it again. Folks, we don't serve a weak God. Our enemy, now, compared to us, yes, Satan is powerful. But compared to our God, he's insignificant. He cannot create anything. He cannot stop God. Our enemy is weaker than our God. And folks, we have to use that to encourage ourselves. When we see, and folks, we've talked about it, the end of the book, by the way, tells us that it's going to keep getting worse, okay? Culture, society, politics, all of it. It's going to keep getting worse until Jesus comes back and says, all right, we're done with this. I'm going to fix it all. Okay? But always know the battle has already been won. Now, we stop to fight it, and that's the interesting part. You know, these guys come back and they're like, God's already got this. Everything's fine. God's going to give us the land. But you know what these guys still had to do? They had to go swing a sword and fire a bow. Is it called firing a bow? Because there's no fire involved. They had to go launch a bow. I don't know. Anyhow, they had to go shoot a bow. I don't know what it's called. Anyhow, I do firearms. I don't do bows. Anyhow, they had to go fight. Okay, sorry for that distraction there. They had to go fight. They couldn't just sit there and go, well, God said he was going to give it to us, so we'll see what that looks like. They had to go out and do something. Folks, the battle is won, but we've got to go fight it. He gives us the strength to fight it. We can take encouragement in the fact that we're on the winning team. Okay? We serve the all-powerful God. We serve the one who will win. Remember, where does Satan come from? Satan started out as an angel serving God. And then he got his head really big and he decides, I'm going to be God. And God said, no, you're not. And Satan and the ones who followed him, they're all cast out of heaven. Why? Because there is no replacement for God. You will not defeat him. And so Satan is cast out. You know what? God did it before. The victory is sure. We're just called to do our part and fight that battle. Folks, to understand the enemy is to be encouraged if we understand our God. If we really get a hold of our God and who he is, then our enemy is not scary. He's scary, but he's not that scary because we have more power, okay? We serve the all-powerful God. There was a fly on my Bible. Okay. I'm sorry, folks. It just comes, I can't not say it. My brain just does that. Okay. We serve the all-powerful God. We serve the one who's going to win. So as we get to know the enemy, what do we have to do? We're getting ready to invade, right? We are called to be an invasion force. What do we got to do? Yes, we got to get prepared. We got to get everything ready. We got to get our hearts ready. We got to get our supplies ready. We've got to be ready to do this, and then we've got to know the enemy. And the first step, the first thing in knowing the enemy is knowing they're weaker than our God. Our enemy is not as strong as our God. We've got to get out there and know them, folks. We cannot reach people that we don't know. It just doesn't work that way. We've got to get out. We've got to know people. We got to get to meet them. We got to build friendships with them. We got to build relationships, and we've got to reach them. Okay? Why? Because they're not actually the enemy. They're the ones being used by the enemy. And our job is to go out and snatch them away from the enemy and turn them to Jesus Christ. Folks, are you encouraged by the power of the God you serve? Over and over, we come across our culture of fear and anxiety. It's everywhere in our world today. People are struggling with fear, anxiety, depression, all of this stuff. And when we see that, where does it fit in your life? What works? What is worrying you? Because, folks, we have one job to do, and we have the God who has the power to do it. We can trust in him. Are you encouraged by the power of the God you serve, and do you really believe that God will give the victory? Do you really believe that the victory is ours? Now, again, I understand it's going to keep looking uglier and uglier and uglier. And sin is going to be getting worse, and everything is going to look worse. There's going to be attacks on Christians yet. But when it's all said and done, there is coming a day when Jesus is going to come down as the conquering king. And he's going to say, it's done. And he's going to do away with all of this. And he's going to set up his kingdom where we will rule and reign. Folks, you serve the God who's all-powerful. Do you really believe he'll give the victory? Now, again, our job is to fight the battle. We got to fight. We got to go out there. We got to find people, snatch them out of Satan's camp, and bring them into ours. Do you believe that God can do that? Now, we're going to talk about that some more next week, and I'm kind of really excited about what next week's going to be and what the message is. I told Heather earlier this week, I said I have to decide whether this is one message or two, because this is either one, I think I got him. I think I killed him. I'm not sure. Okay, this is either one really long message or it's two, and it's probably a good thing that it's two, because we're at our normal length here. But we have a whole nother message where we actually see some amazing things about Rahab. We're going to learn some really cool things about Rahab. But for this week, are you encouraged by the power of the God you serve? We're going to stop here. I'm just like I always do. I'm going to stop here in a few minutes, and I want you to think about that. Are you encouraged? Can you take your courage, your encouragement from the power of your God, and then, because do you really believe that he will win? You are on the winning side. Do you believe that? Let's take just a moment. We'll be quiet, and I want you to think about that before we close in prayer. Heavenly Father, God, we love you. And Lord, I thank you for your word. I thank you that the battle's already won. You have the power. We just need to go out and serve. We need to do it your way. We need to honor you. Lord, I just pray that you will strengthen us to do that. I pray that we will stop and take our encouragement from you and your power. God, we love you. We thank you for loving us and guiding us. I thank you for winning the battle already. We honor you and glorify you this morning. We love you, Lord. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Stand with me as we get our closing. Same God then, the old story still applies today. Victory in Jesus. I heard an old story, how a Savior came from glory, how he gave his life on Calvary to save a wretch like me. I heard about his groaning, of his precious blood's atoning.